When a racist police officer wrongfully arrested the wife of the police captain, the entire department was about to face a reckoning they'd never forget. It was a warm day on the bustling streets of Brookhaven, a city alive with its usual rhythm. People crowded the sidewalks, cars honked in traffic jams, and the scent of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery mingled with the smell of gasoline. Some hurried along, checking their watches. Others strolled leisurely, enjoying the sunlight, while a few simply walked, lost in thought. Amidst the crowd stood Vanessa, a woman with dark skin and a posture that commanded attention. Her movements were confident, exuding an inner strength and dignity. A few steps ahead was her best friend Camille, dressed in a light sky-blue dress that seemed to flow gracefully with her stride. Around Camille's neck glimmered a delicate gold necklace, catching the sunlight and sparkling as if it were a cherished heirloom. For Camille, it was more than just jewelry. It was a gift from her husband Damon, a symbol of their love and a reminder of their most precious moments together. Vanessa and Camille crossed the street, passing a row of parked police cars. Leaning casually against the hood of one was Officer Grayson, sipping from a paper cup of coffee. His uniform was slightly crumpled, but the gun at his waist gleamed with meticulous polish. Grayson was a veteran of the force, yet his years of service had not made him wiser or more tolerant. Instead, they had solidified a sense of superiority in him. To Grayson, the uniform wasn't just a badge of authority, it was a tool that allowed him to exert dominance whenever he pleased. His biased worldview clouded his judgment, reducing the world to a simplistic dichotomy of suspicion and division. Grayson's eyes caught the glint of Camille's necklace. Narrowing his gaze, he studied her closely, then turned his attention to Vanessa's confident stride. Unlike others who would avert their gaze or quicken their pace when passing a police officer, Vanessa remained calm and composed, her steps unhurried. This nonchalance irritated Grayson. To him, it felt like a challenge to his authority, an affront to the respect he believed he was owed. His ego bristled. "Hey, you!" he barked suddenly, setting his coffee down on the hood of the car. Vanessa turned, her brow slightly furrowed in surprise. Camille stopped a few paces ahead, glancing back at her friend in confusion. "Yes, officer?" Vanessa asked politely. Her tone carried a hint of caution, but she remained composed. Grayson took a few steps toward her, his eyes scanning her face before flicking to Camille's necklace. "That necklace," he said, nodding toward it. "Where'd you get it?" His tone was cold. Devoid of curiosity, only accusation lingered in his words. Camille blinked, momentarily confused by the question. "It's a gift from my husband," she replied softly, her fingers gently touching the necklace as if to shield it. Grayson crossed his arms, squinting at her. "Looks expensive," he said with a faint, mocking smirk. "You sure it's yours? You see, you match the description of someone suspected of theft." Vanessa's expression hardened slightly. "I assure you, officer, that necklace belongs to her. We don't have anything stolen," she said firmly. Grayson scoffed, her words seemingly bouncing off him as if they held no weight. His eyes glimmered with distrust, tinged with a prejudice he made no effort to conceal. "That's what they all say," he retorted with a lazy smirk. "Everyone's got excuses." Camille froze, feeling her heartbeat quicken. She didn't want to escalate the situation, but deep down she already sensed the thick cloud of injustice settling around them. Vanessa, on the other hand, was prepared to stand her ground. Her jaw tightened, but her composure remained intact. "People like me?" she asked, her tone calm yet laced with an undeniable edge of skepticism. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Grayson took another step forward, his stance growing even more menacing. "You know exactly what I mean," he said, his voice sharp, his eyes narrowing further. "You're coming with me for questioning. We'll sort this out at the station." Vanessa straightened her posture, her voice steady but firm. "I haven't done anything wrong. This is a mistake." Grayson sneered, his lips curling into a condescending grin. "The only mistake here is you thinking you can walk around with stolen goods and get away with it. Let's go." Vanessa's patience was wearing thin, but she refused to let her frustration show. She knew she couldn't afford to let him see her anger. Instead, she tried reasoning with him. "Officer, I'm asking you to reconsider what you're doing," she said evenly. "That necklace is hers. I haven't done anything to warrant this treatment. Please don't make a decision you'll regret." but her words only seemed to fuel Grayson's arrogance. "Oh, I don't regret anything," he said with a smirk. "I like putting people like you in their place. It's part of the job." Vanessa felt her stomach churn at his words, but she held her composure. "I'm warning you," she said softly, her tone controlled despite the storm brewing within her. "You don't know who I am or what you're getting yourself into." Grayson let out a cold, hollow laugh. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. Stop wasting time." As Grayson reached for his handcuffs, Vanessa made her decision. Discreetly, she slipped her hand into the pocket of her coat and pressed a single button on her phone. It was a speed dial to her husband, Terrence. She didn't speak, didn't give herself away. She knew Terrence would understand. Grayson, oblivious to her action, confidently snapped the handcuffs onto her wrists. "Feeling confident now? Let's see how that holds up behind bars," he sneered, smirking with self-satisfaction. Vanessa said nothing as he led her to the patrol car. She climbed into the back seat with an expression of complete calm, but inside her mind was racing. She knew this wasn't just about Harriet, it was about everyone who had ever suffered injustice because of the color of their skin or someone else's prejudice. She trusted Terrence to listen to every word she didn't need to say. At the station, Grayson acted like the hero of the day. He processed the arrest as if he'd just apprehended a dangerous criminal. His colleagues exchanged glances but said nothing while Grayson continued with his snide remarks, belittling Vanessa at every turn. "You should be grateful I didn't add more charges to the list," he said, leaning casually against the desk. "People like you need to learn their place." Vanessa met his gaze, her expression calm, her voice steady. "You're making a mistake, officer, but don't worry, you'll realize it soon enough." Grayson let out a loud, harsh laugh. "We'll see about that." Unbeknownst to Grayson, Vanessa's call had already set events into motion. Her husband, Terrence, was not just any man, he was the captain of the police force, and he was now making his way to the station, determination written all over his face. Every snippet of conversation he had overheard during the call made his jaw tighten further. The station buzzed with its usual activity, officers shuffling papers, answering calls, and discussing cases. Grayson, however, seemed to relish the attention he was drawing with his latest arrest. He leaned back in his chair, a smug grin plastered across his face as he recounted the events to a few colleagues who had gathered around him. "Just another day on the job," he said, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction. "You should have seen her face when I cuffed her. Thought she was untouchable, but I showed her who's in charge." The other officers chuckled nervously, some exchanging uneasy glances. They knew Grayson's reputation, but none dared to challenge him openly. The atmosphere in the room was tense, though no one wanted to be the one to break the silence. Meanwhile, Vanessa sat in the holding cell, her hands resting calmly on her lap. She didn't fidget or show any signs of distress. Instead, she seemed almost serene, as if she knew something Grayson didn't. Her mind was focused, replaying the events that had led her here and calculating her next move. She knew Terrence would come, but she also knew that this wasn't just about Harriet, it was about exposing the systemic issues that allowed officers like Grayson to operate with impunity. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing louder with each passing second. The chatter in the station began to die down as the officers turned their attention toward the entrance. Terrence, the police captain, strode in with an air of authority that immediately commanded respect. His face was stern, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Grayson. "Officer Grayson," Terrence said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "A word. Now." Grayson's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, standing up and brushing off his uniform as if he hadn't a care in the world. "Captain," he said, nodding slightly, "what can I do for you?" Terrence didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced toward the holding cell, his eyes meeting Vanessa's. There was a brief moment of silent communication between them, a shared understanding that spoke volumes. Then Terrence turned back to Grayson, his expression hardening. "Care to explain why my wife is in a holding cell?" he asked, his tone icy. The room fell silent. Grayson's face went pale, his bravado evaporating in an instant. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The other officers exchanged shocked glances, some stepping back as if to distance themselves from the impending fallout. Your wife?" Grayson stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Terrence replied, his voice steady but laced with anger. My wife, Vanessa, the woman you just arrested on baseless accusations. Care to explain yourself? Grayson's mind raced, searching for an excuse, a way to justify his actions. But there was none. He had acted on prejudice, on a misguided sense of superiority, and now he was facing the consequences. The tension in the room was palpable. Grayson's colleagues, who had moments ago been laughing along with him, now avoided his gaze. The weight of his actions and the realization of who Vanessa was began to sink in. He had crossed a line and there was no going back. Terrence took a step closer to Grayson, his presence overwhelming. You have 5 seconds to explain yourself, he said, his voice low but filled with authority. And I suggest you choose your words carefully. Grayson swallowed hard, his mind racing. He knew there was no way to talk his way out of this. The truth was undeniable. He had targeted Vanessa and Camille because of his own biases, and now he was facing the consequences. I thought she was involved in a theft, Grayson stammered, his voice trembling. The necklace, it looked expensive, and she matched the description of a suspect. Terrence's eyes narrowed, his patience wearing thin. And did you bother to verify any of that? Or did you just assume because of the color of her skin? Grayson's silence was all the answer Terrence needed. He turned to the other officers in the room, his gaze sweeping over them. This is not how we serve this community, he said, his voice rising. We are here to protect and serve, not to judge and discriminate. What happened here today is unacceptable, and it will not be tolerated. The room was silent, the weight of Terrence's words sinking in. He turned back to Grayson, his expression unyielding. You're suspended, effective immediately, he said, and you can expect a full investigation into your conduct. If I find even a hint of misconduct, you will be held accountable. Grayson's face fell, his bravado completely shattered. He nodded weakly, unable to meet Terrence's gaze. As he was escorted out of the room, the other officers watched in stunned silence, the reality of the situation settling over them. Terrence turned his attention to Vanessa, who was now being released from the holding cell. He walked over to her, his expression softening. Are you okay? He asked, his voice filled with concern. Vanessa nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. I'm fine, she said. But this isn't just about me. This is about everyone who's ever been treated unfairly because of someone else's prejudice. We need to make sure this doesn't happen again. Terrence nodded, his resolve strengthening. It won't, he said firmly. Not on my watch. As they left the station together, the weight of the day's events hung in the air. But amidst the tension, there was also a sense of hope, a belief that change was possible, and that justice, though delayed, would ultimately prevail.